Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. It's my pleasure to present our speaker for today, the State Library's Genealogy Librarian, Regina Fitzpatrick. Today we are going to be talking about slavery and emancipation laws in 19th century New Jersey, particularly from a point of genealogy research. So, what are the documents that are out there? What kind of information you can glean from them for a variety of ancestors. So, it's going to be chock full of information. So, let me just go over a few housekeeping items and we'll get underway. We will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation because there's a lot of content to get through, but you can submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. There will be a survey available at the end of the webinar. So, if you have time, we ask you please complete the survey. We appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. There is a handout for today, but we won't be distributing it as a lot of the links recently broke from Rutgers. So we're going to be adjusting those to new links. And once I have that from Regina, I will send it out in the follow-up email so that everybody has a copy of the slides with the correct links. And if you want more information about the topic today, there is the web address on the screen there. I will be sending that out in the chat once we get underway. So you could explore that at your leisure if you're looking for more information. So one last thing I have for you, just a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have any issues, there is a raise hand button in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you are having. And lastly, as I mentioned, if you do have questions, there's the Q&A or the chat buttons. You can use either of them to get in touch with us, and we'll be addressing those questions at the end of Regina's presentation today. If you do hear any background noise, we apologize in advance. They are doing renovation work in the library. So we apologize, but it seems to be at a minimum right now. So without further ado, Regina, you can take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everybody. Just quickly, let me apologize again about the broken hyperlinks. I only discovered this last night, and we will be working to correct it and get you a handout with those updated links. Um, this presentation is almost 10 years old. It's about 9 years old. And as I've learned more about this topic, I have added more information to it. Um, but essentially, this was a research project for two patrons with very similar questions about whether or not their New Jersey ancestors were enslaved, and if they were, what kind of conditions were they operating under in the 19th century after the 1804 gradual emancipation law passed. As Andrew mentioned, although I am framing this for genealogy researchers, this is a historical context class. We're going to be talking about a lot of the laws, the evolution of the laws, um, just to help deepen your understanding of this topic as you are doing family history research. You will again be getting a copy of the slide deck. I asked for your patience. Again, I only found out that the links weren't working last night. And I do apologize, but we'll get you some new links. But you will have access to the slide deck. And then in our introduction slide, we had a link to a blog post with a bunch of different links that relate to this presentation that we will be discussing throughout. And Andrew is going to be posting a few of those links in the chat as well throughout the presentation. This is, again, a context class. It's very dense. There's a lot of information. I am going to be skimming certain points or not really reading or addressing certain points as I present, as I want to be respectful of your time. I'm going to try to control myself because there are several really interesting rabbit holes that I could get into through this, and I'm going to try very hard not to get into this. If you do have any questions about anything in this presentation that you would like to discuss at a little bit of a deeper level, we can do that in Q&A. I can also, if I don't know or don't remember right off the top of my head, I can do a little bit of research and get you that information by email as well. Um, and I really hope that this presentation just whets your appetite to learn more about this subject. It is a really fascinating one and worth exploring. This is a really important part of our history here in New Jersey. So let's dive in. It is really important for us to provide some context um, from the colonial era because many of these laws that we see in the 19th century had building blocks from this time period. We know that slavery was alive and well in New Jersey um, by the 17th century. And we know this because we have the East and West Jersey proprietors laws. We have the grants and concessions of the West Jersey proprietors, which was a proto-constitution um, that gave settlers in the colonies certain rights. And in the first copy of the grants and concessions, when there were only two West Jersey proprietor, it explicitly rewards people or settlers essentially who came in and brought either indentured servants or slaves with them. But as Quakers purchased more and more of the West Jersey proprietorship, slavery became more frowned upon. So eventually in West Jersey, uh, the grants and concessions was updated by 1676, and the word slave was removed except for one reference, which related to court sentencing. And it basically said, no man shall be made a slave. Um, and that may refer specifically to court sentencing because it's mixed in with a lot of other articles that deal with establishing courts. But some people interpret it as abolishing slavery in West Jersey. At the time, East Jersey and West Jersey were two distinct proprietary colonies. They had different laws. Um, some of these laws in both East and West Jersey did provide some protection for enslaved people, while later laws did become more restricted. In 1702, when New Jersey became a royal colony, first of all, they adopted the law as it stood for East Jersey. So any laws in West Jersey were null and void, and East Jersey was the initial law for the new colony of New Jersey as of 1702. In addition, Queen Anne issued a lengthy list of instructions to the first royal governor of the new royal colony of New Jersey, Lord Cornbury, and one of her instructions to him was that he was to import African slaves into the colony of New Jersey. She even provided a specific company she wanted him to work with to do this. The first slave law of the new royal colony of New Jersey was passed in 1704. This law was the building block of all future slave law. There were major revisions that had massive impacts throughout the 18th century, passed in March 1714. This revision addressed many things, including punishment for murder, rape, and destruction of property, and this was being burned alive at the stake. If any of you have ever read Graham Russell Hodges' Root and Branch, the title of that book comes from an alleged quote of the last words of an enslaved person being burned at the stake. In addition to these harsh punishments for these crimes, the law now made it much more difficult for enslavers to manumit their slaves. Um, and specifically to Black enslaved people. So that is a very important distinction. This law is incredible, and I don't mean incredible in a good way, um, because it basically creates a tier list by race of slaves, and Black people are at the bottom of that list. The law specifically calls them lazy and slothful, and that is why this provision was specifically made. It's very interesting to note again that this law was passed after a slave revolt that involved Black enslaved people in New York City. So, Black enslaved people, it was very difficult to manumit them throughout the 18th century from a cost perspective. In order to manumit a slave, you had to have 200 pounds and you paid that to the government. And then you had to be able to support the person that you were manumitting on a stipend of 20 pounds per year throughout the person's entire lifetime. Many people did not have 200 pounds to their name. So this would have been a significant and for most people an impossible cost to meet the requirements of this law. Also, one of the things that I will note, we are not going to be discussing this in detail. Whenever there is a slave law, there is almost always provisions that also affect freed people as well. And this law was no different because it prevents free people from owning property in New Jersey, including houses or land. So the next two slides I am going to summarize. It is important to note I have these two slides in here because it's interesting to have resources where you can look for enslaved people's records of their existence and how they were represented in the historical records. But I want to bring this up because sometimes things in newspapers, courts, and early land records can pertain to slavery and New Jersey, and sometimes those things relate to the laws that are currently in existence. So on this slide, I have a representation of a free woman in court, and somebody was trying to enslave her. So she is suing him. The bottom agreement comes from the early land records, and it doesn't pertain to land at all. It pertains to this man who must meet certain requirements in order to be manumitted. And one of the things is, and this relates back to that 1714 law about owning property or owning land, is that he has to leave British territory completely after he serves an indentureship and behaves perfectly, essentially, then he will be freed, but he must leave all British North American territories. Newspapers give you all kinds of social news. They give you information about sales and they give you information about current events. Um, so this may relate, like events that you read about in the newspaper may relate back to the law. The colonial era newspapers, particularly a publication called Extract from American Newspapers, related to New Jersey, I think is really essential if you are doing colonial research. This resource is digitized, it's completely free online, and it's truly fantastic. And I have two examples up on the screen of uh, things that relate to enslaved people. One is a sale that includes the sale of people, and the other one is news of a 1733, I believe, Somerset County slave revolt. And the only evidence I've ever been able to find of this slave revolt is in this newspaper. I do want to stop and talk about petitions because petitions more directly influence the law. Um, New Jersey citizens would often write to the legislature on a wide variety of topics. I have a link to the New Jersey State Archives Bureau of Archives and History finding aid at the top of this slide, where many of these are housed. Um, they do have in the finding aid a complete listing of all manuscripts included. So if you are looking for petitions that are specifically related to slavery, you can use Control F and search a wide variety of keywords um, to try to find petitions that specifically relate to slavery. The legislature did listen to petitions and they influenced the laws that were passed. And there were many people, even predating the Revolutionary era, who were against slavery. A lot of these people tended to be in West Jersey. They were Quaker. Again, back to grants and concessions, that 1676 revisions. Um, so a lot of the pro-abolition petitions you are going to see will be from West Jersey. A lot of the anti-gradual emancipation or manumission or transportation, well, not transportation, but anti being able to transport slaves out of state petitions that you see are going to be from East Jersey. Um, I am showing you two examples here. Both of these are pro-abolition petitions or related to the rights of slaves. On the left is a 1761 petition to the legislature by residents of New Jersey opposing the importation of slaves into the royal colony of New Jersey. The right petition is a 1775 petition by citizens of Chesterfield, which is in Burlington County, West Jersey, supporting gradual abolition. And we're going to talk a little bit more about gradual emancipation in a minute. And note, I'm showing two, you know, petitions for people who are on more on the side of emancipation, more on the sides of being kinder and more permissive to enslaved people, but there were just as many on the opposite side. And it's also important to note that petitions were not only a colonial thing, they continue into the Revolutionary era and into the 19th century. We are not going to have a lot of time to talk about abolitionist work in this presentation, but know that starting in the late 18th century, we did have a society for promoting the abolition of slavery here, and they submitted many petitions, and they are responsible for many of the laws that we are going to be discussing leading up to the 1804 Gradual Emancipation Law, and they are directly responsible for that gradual emancipation law. So that's important to note. It's another area I could go down a giant rabbit hole. We just don't have time today. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer them in Q&A. So a lot of the analysis on this slide, I'm going to give you another fantastic resource for you to look at. It's from chapter 1 and 2 of a book by James Gigantino entitled The Ragged Road of Abolition. We also have an online curriculum, which I link to in the blog, called Afro-Americans in New Jersey, A Short History. Pages 25 to 36 provide a lot of the backbone of this slide as well. Um, And the Afro-Americans in New Jersey, A Short History, is part of the state library's New Jersey African American History Curriculum Guide, grades 9 to 12 as well. So there is a lot of other information and a lot of other resources in this particular curriculum guide, and I highly recommend you check it out. Again, I do link to it in that blog post. Um, oh, and that's no longer accurate anymore. I may update the blog post to include the Wayback Machine of an old annotated bibliography that Rutgers used to have on their website. They have since removed it, but it is powerful and it's full of resources. So I'll see about finding it on the Wayback Machine and including it because it's Wayback Machine, aka an archive site. The links may not work throughout, but you can at least see the content. So there was a massive cultural shift right before the Revolutionary War, where more and more people were supporting abolition. I guess if you are, supporting independency, you might take a good hard look at yourself if you're enslaving people and ask yourself, well, how does that work? And I want to sum this up with a quote. This is from Reverend Jake Grime's Fast Day sermon at Hanover in Morris County in 1779. I have the entire sermon linked for you in the blog. The Reverend says, can it be believed that a people contending for liberty should, at the same time, be promoting and supporting slavery? What foreign nation can believe that we who so loudly complain of Britain's attempts to oppress and enslave us are at the same time voluntarily holding multitudes of fellow creatures in abject slavery? And that while we are abundantly declaring that we esteem liberty the greatest of all earthly blessings. So again, we've discussed the division between East and West Jersey a little bit. West Jersey was a Quaker stronghold. Most Quakers did support abolition. However, so in the colony formerly known as West Jersey, slavery was shrinking. Meanwhile, in East Jersey, especially after the Revolutionary War, it grows. And it grows because it's close to New York City, where the British were headquartered for a large portion of the Revolutionary War. So there were a lot of battles there. There were a lot of encampments there of both armies. And so many farms, farmers, crops, natural resources were ruined, leading to an economic depression post-Revolutionary War. So people in this area needed a solution, a very cheap solution to rebuild New Jersey's economy. And so slavery was part of that solution. And slavery grew in East Jersey specifically through the 1790s. Meanwhile, West Jersey abolitionist Quakers are pushing, they're seeing what other states are doing. They're seeing, New Hampshire's constitution being written abolishing slavery completely, and they want that in New Jersey. So they are starting to organize themselves and start pushing. The Society for the Abolition of Slavery was founded in the mid 1780s. Its constitution was written in 1793, and that's when this big push started, and you start to see all these laws getting passed. So that the society is directly responsible for an act to prevent the importations of slaves into the state of New Jersey and to authorize the manumission of them under certain restrictions and to prevent the abuse of slaves. This modified the horrid economic conditions imposed on would-be emancipators in 1714. It made it much easier to manumit people between the ages of 21 and 35 as long as they were of sound mind um, and capable of supporting themselves. In 1798, there was a law, a very significant law that remained until, as far as I can tell, the 13th Amendment passed, called an act respecting slaves. Repealed the 1714 law, and it included provisions such as requirements that slaves born after November 26, 1788 be taught to read. That was a major sticking point of the Society for the Abolition of Slavery. One of their main social cultural goals was to make sure that everybody could read. Um, that abuse of a slave was indictable, and slaves residing in the state longer than 12 months had to consent to be transported out of state. I'm giving you all the good stuff in this law. There's bad stuff in this law too for enslaved people and also for free Black people. Um, we are not going to go over this law in great detail. It is a very significant law, and it had great impact on 19th century New Jersey slavery. So I want that noted. Again, if you have any questions about it, we can talk further in Q&A. I can also do a little bit of research from you and send you a more lengthy email where we discuss it in detail. Again, in 1799, something significant happened. So in the North, New Jersey and New York were the last two holdouts on passing some kind of gradual emancipation law. And in 1799, New York finally caved and passed it. This is significant. New York's law was heavily based on Pennsylvania's 1780 gradual emancipation law. Um, and then New Jersey copied our 1804 law largely from New York. Um, again, there was great resistance to this because they were trying to rebuild in East Jersey, which is the part of the state that is closer to New York City. Um, and a lot of enslavers stood to lose money and property. Property rights is something that has been built into English civil law since the Magna Carta, essentially, and people were very resistant to losing any kind of property rights. So by 1800, we know that there were 12,422 people listed as slaves in New Jersey. Because of that 1786 law, which removed the harsh economic sanctions on would-be emancipators, we do start to see a lot more people being emancipated after 1786. Um, I'm sorry, I lost my place in my notes. Give me just 1 second. I thought I had who everybody was here written down. Ah, here we go. Okay, back on track. I'm sorry. So these are three examples of manumission documents from Hunterdon County. Um, the New Jersey State Archives has a collection of emancipation documents from this county digitized on their website. You can get them for free. These are all online. You can look at these in detail on your own. Um, on the left of the screen, the first is a 1791 emancipation pertaining to a woman named Flora. The second one in the middle is also from 1791, and it pertains to two unnamed children. The children are required to serve an apprenticeship before they are fully manumitted, but once the terms of their apprenticeship are completed, this agreement states that they will be manumitted. And the third one on the right is from 1803, so just a year before the gradual emancipation law passed, for a man named Philip. So we finally get to the 1804 gradual emancipation law. Again, this was heavily based on the 1799 New York gradual emancipation law. It is called an Act for the Gradual Abolition of Slavery. And again, these laws are all about compromise. I am focusing on the rights that are gained in the presentation rather than what is taken away, what is imposed as much. So please do read the actual full act so you can see the kind of push and pull. What kind of concessions were made to enslavers? How were they compensated? Um, it will help you understand. Uh, so the main rule of the law is that any child that was born to an enslaved mother after July 4th, 1804 in New Jersey, and they had to be clear, like this wasn't someone passing through New Jersey. The enslaver had to be a New Jersey resident. The enslaved person had to live in New Jersey. So this did not apply to, some guy from down south who went to Princeton University, brought an enslaved person as his butler or whatever, and then left 2 years later. This applied to New Jersey residents. So that's important. So the law stated that any child who was born after July 4th, 1804 was to be freed at 21 if it was a girl or at 25 if it was a boy. And again, New Jersey residents. We're not talking about somebody just passing through. The law allowed enslavers to abandon their uh, to not support a child and abandon the right to their service when they turned a year old. And those children would then become the wards of the township and they could be indentured out for apprenticeships. Um, Children did mostly stay in the homes of their mothers and slavers. And if this happened, if the enslaver did not abandon their rights to a child's service, the owners were then paid $3 a month as a sustenance fee. Um, if you were born before July 4th, 1804, you were still enslaved for life. You could be manumitted, but there was nothing legally to guarantee your eventual freedom. And this was basically, again, that compromise. This ensured that enslavers could keep free labor and the economy and the state would continue to improve. So the law provided a way to record births, which is really great for genealogical resources. Again, there are records for several counties of these enslaved people's births. Um, on the state archives website, I have a link up at the slide. The law provided a provision for a register of births of enslaved children to be kept by the county clerk's office for every county in New Jersey. In New Jersey at the time, there were 13 counties in existence. So I have a couple examples down at the bottom of the screen of births of these children who were to be manumitted. And the births were recorded again so that county officials would know at what time a, a grown-up person would be free. The law just provided for gradual emancipation of children of New Jersey residents who were born after July 4th, 1804, to be freed. It did not prevent any other atrocities to be from being committed against these people. So, a way around this that enslavers found was to just order somebody to leave the state, and out of the state they could be enslaved for life, or they themselves could move out of the state and retain their property. Remember, this resistance does have a very strong tie to property rights and English civil law. Abolitionists did not like this. They did not want this loophole to continue to exist. So finally, over almost 10 years after the act passed, they pushed and they were able to get a law passed called an act supplemental to the act entitled An Act Respecting Slaves. And remember, that's the 1798 law. And this was passed, it protected enslaved people from transportation without their consent. Notice the very heavy quotes I'm using there, and we're going to discuss that in a minute. So, the official process for obtaining consent from an enslaved person was that the person could not be a minor, and they were interviewed by two judges from the Court of Common Pleas for the county where the person resided. Um, if anybody transported someone without their consent, they could be fined. So they weren't facing jail time or anything like that. However, then this outrage happened. Uh, the Van Wickle human trafficking ring was an ongoing effort to take enslaved people out of this state, duping and deceiving them into agreeing to be transported. Again, this is fascinating, so I'm going to try so hard to control myself and not dive into this rabbit hole. You do want to hear a little bit more about this in Q&A, please let me know. Um, and basically, remember the 1812 law had a provision that a non-minor enslaved person had to be examined by three judges of the County Court of Common Pleas where they resided. Well, Jacob Van Wickle was a justice of the Middlesex County Court of Common Pleas, and he used that to transport people out of state and to keep them perpetually enslaved. This was exposed, well, there was a particular incident. This operation was probably in existence for a lot longer, but this situation and what they were doing was exposed in 1818 to great public outrage. And legend has it, and this is documented in the digitized Van Wickle slavering documents. A little boy who was 4 years old managed to escape from Van Wickle's house where he was holding all these people who were going to be transported to Louisiana. And he escaped, got to abolitionist. Another justice of the Court of Common Pleas was a major abolitionist. He went to the newspaper. He exposed this and he really mobilized abolitionists to fight back against this. And it led to Van Wickle and his accomplices being pulled into court to answer for their crimes, especially since the law stated that non-minor people could not be examined and consent to be transported. Only somebody who was an adult could consent to be transported. And the youngest person who was transported out of state in this incident was 6 weeks old. So this person had no ability to consent, and hence the people within this operation uh, were prosecuted. So Van Wickle, since there had to be three judges, obviously got two of his pals, who were also fellow justices in the Middlesex County Court of Common Pleas, to sign off on these examinations for him. The ships used to transport these people to Louisiana were owned by his brother-in-law, Charles Morgan. And yeah, it was a travesty. And although he was prosecuted and he got a slap on the wrist for this, all those people were still transported to Louisiana and they were held in perpetual bondage, and it was an outrage. I highly encourage you to visit the link in this slide once you get the handout. It takes you to a blog post and video about the Lost Souls Memorial Project and the Van Wickle Slave Ring digital collection by the New Jersey State Archives. Um, Worth learning more about this incident. So, with momentum from this act in 1818, a law was strengthened. Uh, the law was strengthened against transportation of this kind because of the prosecution of Van Wickle and his accomplices, and the outrage that was generated by abolitionists for the general public. There are legislative petitions related to this in that Archives and History collection, in that finding aid. So you can find some dated, I think there are two petitions dated October, like really late October of 1818. And this act passed in early November, and it's called an act to prohibit the exportation of slaves or servants of color out of this state. Um, they strengthened the penalty for illegal transportation. So there were now higher fines and also jail terms. And your property could also be seized. But again, we have this constant push and pull. So the law also provided protections for any non-resident enslavers. So those people could explicitly, they were finally given explicit permission to bring people into the state of New Jersey and leave with them unmolested. That was not considered transportation. Also, there was a provision for New Jersey enslavers, where if you had lived in the state for at least 5 years and you were planning to relocate outside of the state, if you could prove your residence, you were permitted to transport enslaved people out of the state for the 5 years following 1818. So there was a lull, but then again, we start picking up speed in the 1820s and the 1830s. There was an 1826 personal liberty law that created a legal process where county officials could arrest an alleged fugitive slave who could then be examined by a judge and would be freed or returned based on his decision. The law may have been enacted to help stop kidnappings of free Black residents. Notice the implication here is when you are arrested and held and examined by this judge, you are presumed to be enslaved unless you can prove otherwise. So everything changed in 1836 when a man named Alexander Helmsley, who lived in Burlington County with his wife and family, was arrested as a fugitive. He was examined and subject to the process I just described of this law. And the judge found that he was a fugitive by the judge at the Court of Common Pleas and was sentenced to be sent back to Maryland. However, Alexander Helmsley had friends in the abolition movement, and his attorneys immediately went to the Supreme Court and filed a writ of habeas corpus um, to try to get the judgment of the lower court overturned. And the case was heard by Joseph Hornblower, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the time. He was also a noted abolitionist. Um, and his findings after examining the evidence was that the 1826 law did not include certain due process rights, such as a trial by a jury. So this is a very significant decision because it removed the burden of the individual who was suspected to be enslaved. Um, if they were After the Hornblower decision, there had to be due process, one, and two, they were presumed to be free until evidence was submitted otherwise. This is the reverse of the 1726 law. So that's why this is significant. I have links to the Hornblower decision here. The link under Alexander Helmsley is a interview he did after moving to Canada because of the trauma of this situation and what he was subjected to. He wanted his family to be safe, so they fled the United States altogether. And it's a first-person narrative of his experience. And then this ruling led to an 1837 law which established a three-judge panel to determine an alleged fugitive's true status, and there had to be a provision where the person was able to request a trial by jury. And this law was also significant because it allowed the state of New Jersey, rather than slave catchers who were coming into the state from the South, to control fugitive recovery. Before the 1846 law passed, 2 years before, there was a new constitution. So New Jersey got our first constitution in 1776. We ratified a new constitution in 1844, and it included a Bill of Rights, unlike the 1776 constitution. Article 1 states the following: all men are by free in nature independent and have certain natural and unalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and of pursuing and obtaining safety and happiness. And this is where I'm going to try not to get into a deep rabbit hole again. The fundamental question here is, does this mean that the 1844 Constitution, by this statement, is it abolishing slavery? No. There were two cases. They are collectively and famously known as the New Jersey slave case. And again, they were brought to the Supreme Court because an organized group of abolitionists known as the New Jersey Society Against Slavery uh, organized this. They looked at the Constitution, and their assumption was by this statement, it freed enslaved people. And they were more concerned. So this group had a newspaper called the New Jersey Freeman, and their main concern was that suffrage right be returned to Black men. And that was a loophole in the 1776 Constitution, which existed until 1807. Women and Black men could vote in New Jersey until that right was taken away from us by the legislature. because of election fraud. Um, Again, try not to get into a rabbit hole here, but at any rate, the Abolition Society hired an attorney, a noted abolitionist attorney from New York, to present this case in the Supreme Court and and establish have the Supreme Court establish whether or not the Constitution in fact said that. Um, However, the law and the courts were not on their side in this case. Um, the judge's rule, and by the way, Judge Hornblower was one of the people who heard this case. He apparently gave a verbal opinion, but did not give a written dissent to the majority opinion. This is a quote from Justice Nevis, roughly summarized in his ruling. He said, Article 1 did not abolish slavery and was not intended to interfere with domestic relations. So he's defining slavery under the law as a domestic relation. This case, post Van Buren, the New Jersey Supreme Court case, is digitized and available online. You can read it online. Also, I just want to note that upcoming we this year to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the state of New Jersey and the Declaration of Independence. We are doing a series of digital exhibits entitled NJ 250 Living Documents Evolving Rights. And we are going to be doing an exhibit on the New Jersey slave case. It will be released sometime this year, so look for that upcoming. However, the outrage from this ruling and continuing pressure from this abolitionist society did lead to legislatures reviewing the existing laws, and there was enough public outrage from the decision from abolitionists. And there was also this continual resentment of these individual vigilantes essentially coming into New Jersey, seizing people who they believed were slaves and just dragging them out of the state down south to be enslaved for life, whether or not they were actually enslaved or actually fugitive slaves. That was causing enough public outrage that it did lead to the passage of the abolition law in New Jersey. Again, I want to recommend James Gigantino's The Ragged Road to Abolition. Chapter 9 has a fantastic summary of both the New Jersey slave case and the fallout afterwards, which led to the law being passed the following year in 1846. So there was a lot of pushback against any kind of abolition law in New Jersey. You can see this in opinion pieces in newspapers. You can see this in petitions from residents that were pro-slavery in those in that collection of the Bureau of Archives and History's paper, which I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So again, the legislature created a compromise. Rather than actually abolishing slavery, the 1846 law just stopped using the word slave. Anyone who is currently enslaved for life, aka they were born before July 4th, 1804, was just called an apprentice under the law. Exact same conditions, no nothing else. It's just you're not a slave, you're an apprentice. Um, it did free any child from birth who was born after the passage of the act. Act. So there will be no more generational slavery in New Jersey as long as the child was born after the act passed. Um, it did provide some additional methods for apprentices to address grievances against their masters. You could not sell one of your apprentices out of state. If an apprentice could financially support themselves, they could be released from service at any time. There was none of these manumission documents that had to be filed with the county. That was no longer a required process. Again, non-resident enslavers, it protected their rights to their property, and they could bring an enslaved person into the state and leave with them unmolested. It did increase prosecution and penalties for those who aided runaways as well. We're starting to see the development of the Underground Railroad, helping people to escape, and um, and the pro-slavery people did not like this. New Jersey was a very antebellum state. I want to close with two things. So one, there are no slaves in New Jersey after 1846, right? Well, then why, in the 1860 census, which is the last census prior to the last federal census, prior to the 13th Amendment being passed and people being, slavery being against the law of the land in the United States. There are two tables which represent Black people, one for free and the other for enslaved. You can see this on both the left and right. So these are the second and third tables in both illustrations. There are 19 total people in that third table on both slides that are listed as being slaves. One of the individuals is over 100 years old. And I think, yep, so only, I'm just counting here. No, 100 is not. I think actually all of the counties represented here are East Jersey, where enslaved people or somebody who's listed as being enslaved, even though according to 1846, people were apprentices now. Yeah. So I'll let my use of quotes tell you what I think about this whole situation. Um, and then so New Jersey did approve the passage of the 13th Amendment. We did ratify it as a state, but we were the last state in the North to do so again. We approved it in January of 1866. Um, and that means that up to 19 people were kept in bondage until then. So I want to briefly give you a window into what happened next after slavery. These are two New Jersey Supreme Court cases. This involves the fight for freedom and citizenship here in New Jersey after the 13th Amendment was passed. There is a really excellent, robust treatment of this subject in Root and Branch, which I mentioned very early on in this presentation, Chapter 8. It's called The Black Renaissance Amidst White Racism. The book covers up to 1863, and the chapter describes a flourishing middle class and Black activism at this time. It is heavily leaning towards what happened in New York City, but does include New Jersey. 1867 is not all that far from 1863, so a lot of the content in that chapter does apply. Um, so I very briefly mentioned that New Jersey's first constitution, which was ratified on July 2nd, 1776, did not specify who could vote by race or gender. It had age and income requirements, but did not specify a race or gender. And this loophole led to about 30 years of women and Black men voting until that right was taken away from us in 1807. So in June of 1866, two men from Newark, Abraham Conover and Reverend Charles Thompson, sued local officials for preventing them to register as voters. And I've put the images of their two individual cases. They are on the left and the right of the screen. The middle is an article from the Newark Daily Advertiser, which provides the following analysis. The claim of the plaintiffs of these suits is, to say the least, a novel one, and although it has never entered the minds of the people of our state that any question could arise of this character unless the terms of the Constitution were changed, some interest will nevertheless be excited as to the grounds upon which it will be sought to obtain an interpretation of our state constitution different from that which has hitherto been universally accepted. So, fight for citizenship, fight for suffrage continued after slavery in New Jersey was officially abolished. Remember, the New Jersey Anti-Slavery Society was also fighting for Black men to gain suffrage as well before this. So thank you all so much. I have the link to the blog in this slide. I'm sure Andrew has put this in the chat numerous times. I am happy to answer any questions, and I know I packed your head full of information here, and this is a very dense, complex topic. So if you do want to follow up by email or by phone, please do feel free. And I look forward to hearing from you. I'm happy to take any questions I can now. I may tell you this is too complicated for us to get into here. Let me send you an email, especially if I don't remember something off the top of my head or I can't quite remember the name or the link to a resource. I may follow up with you via email. And I really hope you enjoyed and got something out of this brief overview. Thank you.
Thanks, Regina. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to submit them via the chat or the Q&A, and we will be able to address them. Let's see here. Were the children of slaves considered mulatto in terms of government records and things like that?
I think some of them could be. I don't have any information off the top of my head. I could do some research on whether or not that was a legal classification or if someone just looked at someone and described them as mulatto, like, oh, this person has lighter skin, or obviously they're half white, or if that was any kind of official classification. An interesting resource for that might be to look at the instructions for census takers of the federal census. These are digitized online. They do have certain specific racial classifications, but I don't know how that was like specifically applied legally under New Jersey law either. I just know that exists in some cases in those instructions specifically for federal census takers.
Do you know if anybody died while they were trying to advance abolition in New Jersey?
I don't know off the top of my head. Um, We might be able to find that out like through newspaper articles or something like that. I know that the 1804 Society for the Abolition of Slavery was made up of pretty powerful and influential people, and they did a lot of their work through lobbying, and they were well connected to legislatures. They moved in the same social circles, all that good stuff. So I doubt there was back then, but that's something that I would have to look up in more detail to see if there were like any marches or protests or anything, or, there were any murder trials where someone was specifically killed because they were an abolitionist or someone who was fighting for abolition.
Can you speak to where you were getting the numbers of the enslaved individuals a little bit more?
So those are all from census data. This is not the population schedule. This is from kind of like the tables we looked at in the 1860 census a few minutes ago. There are tables of populations that give you those numbers. I pulled the numbers specifically from Gigantino, who pulled the numbers from those census tables. There's also a digitized resource, so I will have to get the name that does have information about slave data in the census. I can't remember if it specifically relates to New Jersey or if it's just broad across the country. But if you send me an email, I can try to find that for you. But the figure that I referred to for the 1800 census, that specifically comes from Gigantino.
What part of New Jersey was considered west?
So, West, if you picture a diagonal line across kind of dividing New Jersey like this. It's much easier to describe with an illustration, but if you're picturing the state of New Jersey, there's a line that goes across it this way. And this part, which is the lower part closer to Pennsylvania, is West Jersey. And this part, which is northeastern closer to New York, is East Jersey. What I'll do is I will find an illustration of the dividing line that shows the Lawrence line between East and West Jersey so you can see kind of where it divides out. The Lawrence line is still uh it is still in existence today, and it's relevant for land slash property disputes if you're right on or near the border. There's a road in Mercer County called Province Line Road that runs along the Lawrence line. So that's a little bit of trivia for you.
Did the Federal Fugitive Slave Act limit the rights that could be given in New Jersey?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know about New Jersey law. I don't know as much about the Fugitive Slave Act. I'm sure it had a big impact on New Jersey law. If you send me an email, let me do a little bit of research and I will get you some more information on that.
Oh, sorry. Um, were slaves or emancipated people able to afford or get a lawyer, or was their legal representation done voluntarily through the different abolition societies?
I am not sure in general. I can think of a few specific examples where abolition societies would put up a defense. There's also a really fascinating um, part of a chapter of the Society for the Abolition of Slavery, which operated in the late 18th and early 19th century in New Jersey, where a county chapter, the Gloucester County chapter, their minute books are available. And one of the things that they would do is they would go out to known enslavers and they would get a verbal guarantee that the person would emancipate their slaves. And then if they didn't, they would do a habeas corpus case and bring that person to court to try to get the person emancipated. Um, so I don't know how the split worked, whether or not if it was a freed person who was fairly wealthy and, a slave catcher came up from the South and was like, that person's a slave, if they could afford their own representation, or um, if an abolition society acted on their behalf. And like I said, there is evidence that some people individually did have abolitionist assistance. For instance, Alexander Helmsley. A few months ago, we discovered this really fascinating exchange in a newspaper between an enslaved man and his enslaver, where the guy was arguing, "No, I'm free," and they went back and forth in ads. And he was friends with Stacy Potts, who's very famous in Trenton. He was a noted tavern keeper. Um, and I think his name was Nathan Beasley, who was actually married to William Trent's daughter, who were trying to assist him in being freed. And there was a habeas corpus case for him. And the judges of the Supreme Court actually ruled that this agreement that he and this enslaver had did not mean that he was manumitted, essentially. So in that case, too, the person had assistance. And oh goodness, I can't remember his name. The other two guys' names were Will and Cato, and they were listed in this dude's inventory. Um, but I can't remember this person's name. Oh, his name was Adam. His name was Adam, and he was enslaved to Dr. David Cowell, who was a noted Trenton physician. And Dr. Cowell won that particular case, although Adam had assistance from Stacy Potts and Nathan Beasley, I think his surname was. And this happened in 1780, by the way.
All right, I don't see anything else. Anything you'd like to close with, Regina?
Just another mea culpa about the slides. I promise we will get updated slides with the citations to the law so you can go through and find them. I'm really bummed out that that resource is no longer available, or they didn't give us a replacement resource. But I will figure out a way that you can more quickly and easily get to the laws themselves so you can read them over and learn more. And if I didn't answer your question adequately or you want more information, please do send me an email. I'm happy to do some research and get you some more information.
All right, thank you so much, Regina, and thank you everybody for attending today. We hope you found this chock full of useful information. Everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.